to Who Corner to Corner podcast. We're here for another 15th Doctor episode review. I've got my Sonic, because why not? And
I've got my glass of water, because why not?
And we're going to talk about the story and the
Crack
ending,
on, lad. Yes.
which is just broadcast today, or streamed today, depending on how you choose it, how you choose to view it. So this was a bit of a different episode, wasn't it? I think this time around, and the doctor. I was going to say the doctor goes to get a haircut, and then
it's a great plot, isn't it? The doctor goes to get a haircut, but there's obviously a lot more to it than that.
There is a lot more to it. Yeah,
that's the surface level.
Yeah, and ends up sort of discovering that the place that was special to him is using people's stories to kind of power itself, and it is a ship that exists in Lagos and in space at the same time, and is on the back of a giant sort of robotic spider. That was and there was something with gods of stories in different incarnations. I'll be honest, I was slightly lost on that part of it all. But I thought this was quite a different episode. And I'll be honest, I didn't like it as much as the preceding few episodes.
Jeff!
No, but I'm not finished. But I think the performances were really good in it. I think there's probably a lot of people that this would connect really strongly with, and I think it's great to see the show doing something like this, trying something different in its kind of, it's essentially a bottle episode all taking place in the one location, to do something like that. And I think Shooty was asked early on what would a story he'd want to have happen for his Doctor, and he said he wanted something that was took place in Nigeria, because obviously that's where he comes from, isn't it? He's got heritage there, and he was fantastic in this one. It's clearly the whole thing kind of was obviously very personal to him, which I thought was fantastic. Yeah.
It was good.
The hair growing.
The hair growing back. That was a lot of fun, wasn't it? Yeah, I must admit, I enjoyed this one. I thought it was very much more a kind of, which, given the writer, probably makes a lot of sense. Actually, it's more like a theatre piece, right? It's it's very much. I could see this thing being performed on stage, so it was quite talky. There was a lot going on. There were a huge amount of layers and depths. And it managed to do all that within the context of a Doctor Who story. What I thought was really, really clever about this. I mean, obviously there's the whole thing about stories and gods and mythology and legends and historical traditions that are passed on through storytelling from one generation to another, which is deeply important to all cultures right across the world. And our relationship with gods and monsters and ourselves and different facets of humanity and all that sort of thing. How all of that was encapsulated within a very tight sort of 44 minute kind of story with a giant robot spider, which is brilliant, right? And so, okay, just park that there for a moment, take all that, right? Now you remember when I was kicking off about Lux a few weeks ago? About it breaking the fourth wall and about it telling us that this is a fiction, essentially telling us or showing us that this is a story, that the Doctor pops out of his own story. I thought that was very cack-handedly handled, really, and I'll make my thoughts very clear on our podcast on that. This was essentially the same kind of thing, right? This was a story about stories, a fiction about fictions within fiction within fictions, within gods, but this is how, to me, you break the fourth wall. Right, you do it in a way that just is not so. It's just not so dumb or brutal. In a way that does not break the fabric of the story, but actually enhances it. That draws your attention to it in a way that helps the story and the characters and the humanity shine through, rather than just dismantle it to say, look how fucking clever I am, I'm telling everybody it's a story. Anyone can do that. It's the simplest thing. It's literally like a kid picking up a brick and throwing it through a window, as opposed to somebody actually looking at how the window is constructed and forming something that draws your attention to the fact it's a window, put a safety glass on it, or something, a sticker on it. But, you know, honestly, I love this. I thought it's brilliant. This is the only Russell T Davies 2-story, RTD2, that I think I can watch multiple times.
Really?
And probably The Well. Yeah, I thought The Well was great on a different kind of level. This is one that got my head thinking. You know what I mean? And I love those things. You know, it's not intellectualized to a point that it's not easy to understand. You know, but it does make you think. And I think in order to really get all the colours of the story shining through, all the different facets of that jewel, if you like, is to watch it again and again. And it reminded me very much of Can You Hear Me? You know, and that was like the Charlene James story from the Chris Chibnall era. You know, it's a story that on one hand is about a very simple thing, but has so many more layers. And I thought as well, so I'm talking really quickly now, because I'm actually quite excited. I have not enjoyed a story like this for a long, long time. So this is just beautiful for me, right? I'm going to treasure this moment right now, because it's the first story I've enjoyed for a long time that has really made me think in Doctor Who, and that I genuinely want to watch again and again, because there is so much more going on. I think, you know, the guy who wrote this, what's his name? Inua Ellams. Apologies if I pronounced that wrongly, but you know, he's I was just doing a bit of research on him. You know, he's a playwright, he's a poet. You know, this is his milieu, this is his thing, this is what he does. He wrote a play called The Barbershop Chronicles a few years back, and it was all about those stories that are told in a Nigerian barbershop or in an African barbershop. It was, you know, it's all the different, covering the whole range, from what I can gather, of human kind of, you know, the human experience, all the loves, all the laughs, all the hates, all the angers, all of that stuff within this play. And, you know, to get that in a Doctor Who story, I think we're quite privileged in a lot of ways. You know, I think there's a lot of things which are worthwhile drawing attention to. The first time, I think, in the entire Doctor Who history that we've had an entirely black cast, which is quite incredible for Doctor Who. I know we've been kind of heading towards that way for a while, and it's brilliant. But the fact that we now actually see it, and there's going to be a lot of people probably angry out there, well, fuck them. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Because I think this is absolutely brilliant. This is what Doctor Who should be doing. You know, so I honestly, I cannot tell you how much I really, really enjoyed this story. And of course, it had a little cameo as well from one of our other guests that we've had on the show.
Yeah, Joe Martin.
Yeah. And how great was that as well? See all the Doctors, you know, again. I mean, like I said, was it like only last podcast? You know, I love it when we see these little, you know, flashbacks of the Doctors every now and then. You don't want it every week, but just now and then. And to have Joe Martin's Doctor, the fugitive Doctor, kind of pop up, which I had no idea about. I think you did, didn't you? You texted me saying there'd be some spoilery thing.
I'm going to respond to those couple of bits there. Yeah, I went on Twitter and it was like the first thing I saw. And
I've been off that all day, mate.
Yeah, but you know what? I think, you know, slightly off topic, but if you can't watch something, you know, kind of immediately when it's going out, then you need to actively kind of try to stay off social.
You do. You know, you totally do.
Because it's my fault. I went on, and the first tweet I saw was, "Oh my God, she's back," and I thought, "Oh, who's that?" You know, and then someone said, you know, start thinking, and still a lot of more big picture going on. Oh, amazing, you know. So it was blown for me, but
that's a shame.
Yes, maybe because I like a Doctor, and it would have been nice to see it fresh, but you know, I've only just been able to watch, you know, 9:30 tonight. Yeah. So you know, I should have stayed off social, but I didn't. And you know, things in the past, I've done stuff. You know, I've muted words for certain films and things to try to avoid seeing things. And it's a bit like someone had a go at me on Blue Sky because I mentioned the Thunderbolts title spoiler, and I thought, but it's all they've changed it all over the place, and Marvel have let the cat out of the bag. And as far as I'm concerned, hardcore Marvel fans are going to go within the first couple of days of it opening. That's how the box office numbers work. They're going to reveal it after that. If you haven't seen it the first couple of days, I think, you know, you're going to start to see more and more spoilers. Do you know what I mean? If you're,
Yeah.
you know. So anyway, I saw that this morning, and I thought, yeah, my fault for going socially, but you know, fine, whatever. And I thought that, yeah, the whole thing kind of being about stories. Yes, it did do similar to Lux, and there was a little flashback shot of it in there. And I think you're right. Whilst I really liked the way Lux did it, and I do like kind of that fourth wall break and you know, metafiction and stuff. This did it in a, you know, within the world, whilst also commentating on it, and
Exactly.
and, you know,
Yes, that's exactly it. It added to the texture of the story. You know, it showed us an element of the story that it can only do by doing it that way. I don't know if that makes sense. It's getting late, you know, my brain's not entirely working, but
Yeah.
you know,
And,
it was
you
a
know-
lot more subtle than just throwing a brick through the window, which is what Lux did. Sometimes that's not a bad thing, but there has to be a point to it. I think, as I said before, you know, it's like, well, what does doing that actually do? You know, what does it show us? What does it add to the story of the characters or anything? And I just felt in Lux it didn't.
So I speak.
Yeah. Well, you got to wait till I've finished, Jeff. That's why. Anyway, go on. Yeah.
I liked what they did in Lux, but this was a different way of doing it, and I thought that it worked nicely, and you know, the Doctor's, you know, millions of stories were enough to kind of power the, you know, the whole thing there, and yeah, the little you know, glimpses of past incarnations, like you said, it's always nice to see it, but not to overdo it a little bit. And so I didn't know the context for Joe's return. You know, I just saw the thing this morning. But my sort of interpretation was that the lady, she called Abby. I can't remember her name.
Yeah. Abby.
She was talking to the shooty, and then, you know, we changed. She must have had interactions with Joe's doctor, you know, in the past, so knew.
That's how I read it.
Yeah, because I saw a few people online saying, "Oh, did Shooty's doctor open the fob watch and have memories?" Because it was a bit weird at the beginning. He said, "I've never had this black body before," and I took that to mean him saying, you know, "I've never been black before," but of course you have. And why wouldn't he remember? Because he knows about that. But maybe he was being a bit more literal. This body, you know, he's had a black body before, but not this one. But anyway, she obviously had you know, encounters with Joe's doctor before, and as we know, we spoke to Jo Martin last year, and she said that she'd met Shooty, and
she did, and she came very close, I think, to telling us the big secret that we've just seen.
Now it makes sense that when we spoke to her, which was about a year ago,
probably was,
they would have been filming this about a year, so it wouldn't have been that far after. So she obviously only appeared very briefly in this episode, but she's got to be back for more, because I know she lives. Well, she must be. I can't imagine they'd get her all the way down there just for a few seconds. She's done interviews in the TARDIS set. She's got a new costume variation, which we must ask Al about doing a repaint, a new figure. So yeah, I would be surprised if she doesn't reappear. I think. But anyway, we've got a couple of episodes still to find out. But either way, it's cool. I like that things from, you know, the Chibnall era are still being picked up upon and dealt with in the show.
I think this is the first time we've really seen something from that era being dealt with in a much more sophisticated manner. I think, you know, previously we've had reference to the Doctor being adopted and you know, Timeless Child and stuff like that, but it's all come out as a whole sort of word vomit. You know, at the start of,
and it hasn't really
episodes.
done anything else.
It hasn't really done anything. No, exactly. Yeah, it's just, you know, just throwing out a little bit of context there. It's a bit of an info dump. Whereas this started to dig into it in a much more emotional and heartfelt way. I thought. The other thing I'd say to this is actually a very emotional story. I watched it with Freya, and she thought it was really emotional, and it's also, and again, this is why it helps just being a little bit clever about things. I don't mean like, you know, ridiculously intellectualizing stuff and things like that. I mean just making a few choices. So, it's an example. Like, so the Doctor cried again in this episode, or stopped
But
himself from crying,
totally
right?
worth
Pulled it in. Exactly. Rather than just having tears to, immediately visually illustrate the Doctor's sad and upset, we saw him pull it in. There was a range of emotions and expressions going on in his face in that confrontation with Omo, when he realised that the one sanctuary he had was the guy was using him. And it wasn't safe anymore. When you find out your home is not safe, when the people you trusted you can no longer trust, that was heartfelt, and that to me was much more emotionally impactful than any of those tearful moments that we've had, from the 15th Doctor combined. This was way above.
Yeah, it did. It worked really well. I think sometimes in the show I don't like it when something is just suddenly introduced. Oh, there's this barber shop I go to and I have my hair done. Well, how he's only been this Doctor for a little while. How often?
As far as we know.
Well, yeah. And it was a bit like the 11th Doctor had new friends that popped up all the time, like what was the blue guy? I can't pronounce his name.
Oh yeah. Whoever he was. Yeah. And suddenly he knew loads of people like Elvis.
And there's a part of me that's like, I like that there's stuff happening off screen that we don't see, but then also this might have been even more effective if there'd been a mention previously of I'm going to go to the barbers.
Yeah, maybe. I do. I know exactly what you mean. Yeah, but I don't agree particularly.
Well, yeah, I think maybe because the show, whilst there are threads that hang through, it's so singular in each episode that
exactly,
and it's not necessarily, written. The episode always gets jumbled around sometimes. So, in a show like 911 or something, they know what the order's going to be, so you could drop things in earlier on and earlier episodes, but it doesn't necessarily work as easily on here. But the whole thing still worked. I love that he had this place to go to, even though the TARDIS is his home, as this incarnation of the Doctor, this barber shop, meant something. It was really special to him. And I think my understanding is somewhat limited, but within that culture, the barbershop is kind of where it all happens and where people get together. And just at work the other day, I had to make a visit for one of the things, and we went into one of the barbershops, and it was so busy in there, and all these guys sitting there talking and getting their hair done, and it was exactly like that. And it was quite cool. Yeah.
It's like a man space, isn't it? I think it's the same for women as well. I'm never allowed in, when my wife gets her hair done. But it's just a place. You just sit there, you chat, don't you? Just pass the time while away, talk to other people that are in there. It's good fun. Just coming back to your point about the Doctor suddenly having a place to go to. I mean, to be fair, that has happened many times throughout Doctor Who, even in the classic series. Something would be invented purely for that episode that we've never seen anything of before. I mean, one thing I think of at the moment is Time Lash, Sixth Doctor story, where we suddenly find out that the Third Doctor's been here before, and Joe Grant and everything. It's like, I'm sure there are other episodes in my head. I can sort of find loads, but.
I'm sure it does. Yeah, it would have been good to have had a mention of it, but it still works.
Yeah, maybe.
Absolutely.
It does.
Talking of Sixth Doctor, I've been listening to Mrs. Clark and the Cosmos, which is the new 60 set that came out, and the first story, the story Demon, is a really fantastic Dalek story. It's really quite fresh and really, really very good. And the second one, I'm only part way through it, but it has Sixie and Constance going to see Marco Polo towards the latter part of his life.
Interesting.
And of course,
did he remember the Doctor?
Yeah, because they say last time you were here, you were a crustacean old man or something like that.
Crustacean.
Yes, it's
not a very nice way to talk about.
I can't remember how they worded it, but crumbly old man or something.
Crumbly old geezer.
Yeah, but
it's a bit rude, mate.
plays on from that, which I thought was quite cool. Yeah.
That's very nice. Yeah,
So
I like it when things reference older stories like that. So,
Yeah.
what did you make of the giant spider in the World Wide Web and that kind of thing? Then, what's
Yeah,
your
I
thoughts
liked
on
that thing of well, I called it the World Wide Web till it got named after something ugly.
A bit more uglier. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it looked great. You know, the effects have been really good this season. You know, the bit where the door opened, they all started getting sucked out was really good. And I was thinking there's some really good green screen work there. Actually, it was all really clean,
pretty good.
done and
Yeah,
nice.
yeah,
And
yeah.
the spider looked great. I think the design was probably
It's very
you know,
stompy, wasn't it?
yeah, and it
a lot of
kind of
weight
had
on
the face mask type part to it, and it was
Yeah, I like that. Yeah. Like an African
tribal looking.
war mask.
Yeah. Yeah, so I don't know whether it's based on anything,
Ooh, yeah, good point. Yeah, I wonder.
you know, in any pre-existing imagery, or whether they designed it. It sort of made me think a little bit about like Baba Yaga, actually, you know, and the,
Yeah,
house
the
on
big
legs and things.
stilts.
Yeah, and that kind of
Chicken
myth of
legs.
that and things. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I thought it looked really good. Yeah.
Also, I thought it's like the two things. It's like obviously the whole creation myth, very similar in a way to like Terry Pratchett's Space Turtle carried on the backs of four elephants, which kind of
Discworld,
harks
yeah,
back to very early interpretations of how the universe works. You know, when we look
Yeah.
at things in that terms, and I think again, this in many ways carries on threads that have been established since. The Church on Ruby Road with the goblins, right, and the road
Yeah.
signs and all that nonsense, you know. But it's like just in my head, and I know I'm being a little bit biased because I like this story far more than the others. But for me, this is how it's done properly. You know, I mean, if there's one criticism, maybe I would kind of add to this, although Frey doesn't agree, is that maybe it's a little bit too talky. Perhaps, you know, there's a
Yeah.
huge amount of dialogue in there. There's not a huge amount of action. There's a lot of expectation set up for maybe something quite major to happen. And whilst it does on a human level, nothing really happens on a universal scale. And of course, in Doctor Who, especially with Russell T Davies's Doctor Who, we're used to things happening on a universal scale. You know, something's going to happen that's going to blast the whole of creation out of existence or something. You know, so I did like that it didn't do that, but I was kind of half expecting it in a way. So it's kind of a weird sort of feeling.
It did sort of you know, build up there with you know, the heart brain tree thing and the doctor's story and, you know, all of that. But yeah, it wasn't sort of universally threatening, but it was quite nice that it wasn't at the same time.
Yeah, agreed.
And I think, you know, this was a good episode, you know, and you're right, it was quite talky, but there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I think, you know, for me, I liked the sort of, you know, horror thriller element of Lucky Day and the sort of sci-fi horror of The Well and the sort of, you know, the kind of I don't really know how you describe Lux, but you know that.
Bollocks.
And, you know, so this
Bottle before the Lux.
Yeah.
Fine.
But this one, it you know, wasn't my sort of favourite, you know, type. But you know, I think, like you said earlier, there's a lot going on with it, and I was thinking when I was watching it, I would like to watch this one again to start to dive into it a bit more. And I already saw, I think it was Matthew Purchase on Twitter. He'd said earlier he didn't really like it that much. Then he tweeted later we watched it and he was liking it a lot more, kind of diving
There's
into
a
it.
lot of layers in that.
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
just a huge amount of depth to that story, which is the kind of thing that I like. I love when stories do that. Don't get me wrong, I love, you know, green-eyed aliens blasting each other with space lasers and nonsense like that. You know, but for always, as long as the story and or the concepts of the story is strong enough to kind of pull me along with it, you know, that's what I love. I love story and I love characters and space lasers with robots. But space lasers on their own, for me, are generally
it's
not
not
enough. You know,
Yeah,
I just need something a little bit more than that
Yeah.
to really sort of get me back into it, to make me want to rewatch and watch again and again and again. You know,
Yeah.
weirdly, I was watching a little bit more Flux this morning as well. So I was doing a little bit of work, so I kind of had some Flux on in the background, and I was kind of thinking, oh man, I've missed that. You know, I really do, because that is like, you know, it's not massively cerebral, but it does require a lot of attention because there's so many different story layers all intertwined throughout the first, throughout all six episodes. Is that all it was, wasn't it? Crikey. And it feels like so much more, And I thought, and it's weird kind of watching this one because I felt like we were back in series 12, almost 13 territory. Definitely series 12. Like I said, with stories like "Can You Hear Me," which I thought this was quite similar to in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it was. Yeah,
and I love that. Don't you think? Also, just something else I thought as well. Thinking about expectations and build up and stuff like that. The barber. I for one moment I thought he was going to reveal himself as the master or something like that.
I thought he was going to be
or something. Yeah. Just, and that's interesting as well because that was like a peeling away of masks. The barber, right? That's like the doctor. It's a function, isn't he? The guy who cuts your hair. But who is the guy who cuts your hair? Is he just a guy, or is he more than just a guy? Typical, brilliant kind of Doctor Who territory. It's a Doctor Who, so he's not just a guy. He's someone else. And we're told, or he tells us initially that he's a god, or he's the god behind the gods. Right, so he's the one who gave first he is Dionysus and all the others, isn't he? All the gods who tell stories and all the gods of entertainment and fun and partying and all that kind of stuff. And then the Doctor debunks that, and then he tells us that he's the guy behind the gods. And then actually, no, it turns out he's just a bloke. What I mean? So, which I think is great. But he's a bloke who's wounded. You know what I mean? He's had some trauma that's gone on in his life, and he's trying to get revenge in some ways. But the Doctor shows him redemption. Actually, the Doctor gets angry in this, because he's let down by the people he trusted. But he pushes through it. He pushes through that wall, that emotional barrier. Like I said, when you see him crying at that moment, he brings it in. He takes control of it. He doesn't allow it to. He doesn't allow those feelings to kind of direct what he's going to do next. He takes control. He assesses it. He does what the Doctor does. He heals people, and he heals everybody in that room. He gets the guys who've been kidnapped. He gets them home. He heals Abby, gives a new purpose. You know what I mean? And he heals the barber as well. He shows him that he doesn't have to do what he does. And of course, in doing all that, the giant space spider thing is destroyed, which, and it's almost like it ticks all the boxes of a Doctor Who story, but in a really interesting, for me at least anyway, a really interesting and original kind of way, and in a way that makes me want to watch it, and also in a way that doesn't break any of the threads that have been set up in this story arc since Russell T Davies took it on. We've got weird science, we've got goblins, giant spiders. We've got stories and mythology. We've got stories about stories. We're almost touching, like I said, on fictional content, which we've had again throughout. We even had a little Mrs. Flood cameo. We had more about Belinda. We got a really heartbreaking story of Belinda. With the nurse and
really good,
her patient. That got me, man. That almost broke my stone cold heart to pieces. But again, that gives us more character. Tells us more about Belinda and who she is and where she comes from. And mate, this is why I think to get all of this wrapped up in 44 minutes, just absolutely incredible writing. I cannot tell you how much I love this story. Honestly, it's not traditional Doctor Who, but it is. But it isn't. But it is. It's what I've always wanted. Something new by new, again, and writing new to Doctor Who. Brilliant. Love it. Love it. Love it. For me, it's been 10 out of 10, mate. All the way. It's 10 cups of tea. That's 10 cups of tea. It's my cup of tea right there.
I'm pleased that you've enjoyed it. It's about time.
Also, just going to say because we have mentioned it, it's it happens in a place different to where we've seen Doctor Who before. It's in Nigeria, it's in Lagos, right? I think they actually filmed it there as well, didn't they? They actually went out there and filmed it. I think so. I could be wrong. I don't know. I might need to do a little bit of investigating. But I'm pretty sure I read somewhere that they did, but it's good to see when Doctor Who takes us someplace different. Shows us new voices, new perspectives that we don't always see. We always see a very Western kind of male white sort of viewpoint on the world from Doctor Who, and that's where it comes from. So but it's always constantly trying to push that envelope, and I think now is when it actually really has done. It pushed the envelope when we had Jodie as a female Doctor, and it's pushing it again when we have Ncuti as a black Doctor, and now actually bringing black culture into Doctor Who, in a way that seems to me, at least anyway, authentic and genuine, and brings an added kind of texture into the story of Doctor Who.
Yeah,
Love
I
it.
think it was really good that it did that. I'm just going to read some comments quickly. George Cairn says, not one I'll rewatch. It felt like the writer was trying to shoehorn Doctor Who into a different story. We've already got the pantheon of sci-fi gods to deal with without the need to
But
add
this is
gods
part of
and...
that, George. This is part of that pantheon. That's the way I read it, anyway.
He says, without the need to add gods from human mythology, such as Loki. Bit of a mess. But is so interesting how people read things differently. Tony Filer says, fascinating. Rich and vivid and bold and sideways and not a little bonkers. Definitely passed the phone test. Felt like an expansion both of the experience of the Doctor we usually have and the wider Doctor Who universe where gods meet technology.
Yes.
Gorgeous madness.
Yes.
Loved it.
Well,
Spaces, honestly, the first 20 minutes were slow, but once Belinda got there and it picked up, I really enjoyed it. And I got to see Jo Martin as the Doctor in 2025. Why they gave her less than 10 seconds, I don't know, since they went to the trouble of getting her on set, but happy to see her. Well, I would imagine it's not the only thing she did.
you said.
Oscar Groucho says, a powerful hymn to the importance of storytelling, how those myths and fables underpin our own existence and form the bedrock of community and love. A deft interweaving of rich cultural influences mixed with the unique iconography of the programme's own lore.
That was well written, wasn't it? I love that.
Very well written. Yeah.
That was pretty good. Love it. But yeah, totally agree with all of that.
Brothers Mahoney says, didn't personally care for it. It just wasn't my type of thing. Some of the scenes between the Doctor and Belinda were nice, and that memory of Belinda that the Doctor was telling as a story was quality. But overall, wasn't my thing, and among the weakest of the season. Dan Hollingsworth says, great episode and tries new things. I got confused by some of the logic of what people were doing and why. I think that's what stuck me a little bit. But it sets up more of the Gods and Stories arc, so that's okay for now. And oh yes, that cameo, more please. Michael Moslin says, it was okay, straight to the point. And then let me just skip over to Blue Sky quickly. Supreme Human found it a bit boring at the start, at the end, and a bit in the middle. I am still not feeling the Doctor, ooh, I say, and I find him too cool to be an alien. He needs to be more alien-y. 5 out of 10. Greg Cox says, I thought it was pretty good. I'm still baffled. I'm still baffled where the Ruth Doctor fits in the timeline. He said his was the first black body, but it was suggested that she won the bet with Nancy. And Chop Monkey says this week's Doctor Who is delicious, so much to reflect on and enjoy again. So yeah, leaning more to people liking it there, but a few that didn't get it. And you know what? That's fine. They've been respectful about it. They've been all right, and you know, it's what happens sometimes, isn't it? You know, we don't all.
Not everything is everybody's cup of tea. It doesn't mean it's good or bad or anything like that. It just means
it
didn't
you.
pull you in for whatever. You know, this is the great thing we've all said about Doctor Who. You can tell any kind of story. I think as long as it does it within, as long as it does it well. But then, what does that mean, right? So is there really a thing? You know, you enjoyed Lux. I absolutely hated it. So who's right? Who's wrong? Neither of us. Really, we just enjoyed what we enjoyed.
Me.
It's not. It really isn't.
So, on that note, I'm going to have to depart, I'm afraid. But we will be back next week to discuss the Interstellar Song Contest.
Oh, yeah. Are you looking forward to this one?
Yeah. I quite like Ryland. I think he's done really well for himself, from his X Factor days. I think he's a good
kind of dreading it in a way.
He's funny and he's cheeky and all that. So and he appears to be a Who fan. So I think it's great that he's in the show. So
it's got Graham Norton on it as well, hasn't it?
Oh, it has got Graham Norton and
actually officially in the story rather than just
gate crash
voiceover. Yeah.
And it's also got Christina Rotondo, who was the Goblin singer as well, appearing, I think, under prosthetics in it. So, yeah, I saw someone suggest they think this might be a fugitive of the Jadoon style misdirection, and it turns into
We shall
something
see.
else, maybe. But we'll see. So yeah, I'm kind of looking forward to this one. Hopefully, it'll be a bit of a banger as well. So yeah,
Let's hope
brilliant.
so. Here's looking forward to that
All
one.
right.
Right. Good stuff.
Thanks everyone. Thanks for all your comments and for tuning in. And we'll catch you next time on the podcast.
Indeed. Bye for now. See you next time. Ta-ta.
TT and FM.
CTM.